The National Portrait Gallery has opened after a 3-year revamp. And in this gallery, we see a plethora of women sitters. Hello, my name is Katy Hessel. I'm an art historian and I've been invited by the Booker Prize to have a look at some of my favourite literary heroes here at the National Portrait Gallery in London. So today we're going to be exploring the likes of Zade Smith, Vita Sackville-West, and also Booker Prize winners such as Iris Murdoch. Standing before me is an extraordinary 28-foot-long, 7-panelled mural titled Work in Progress from 2022 that has been made especially for the new revamped National Portrait Gallery that celebrates 130 women from Britain who have contributed to arts, culture, society, fashion and more. It's by a mother-daughter duo called Jan Howarth and Liberty Blake. And Jan Howarth really rose to prominence in the 1960s for her contribution to pop art here in Britain. But she's also very well known for actually co-creating the album cover to the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club. We have people like Vera Brittain, the extraordinary nurse and pacifist who wrote A Testament of Youth. We have people like Sylvia Plath, known for The Bell Jar from 1963. We have Jane Austen, one of the most extraordinary novelists of the 19th century. All these portraits are based on existing images of the women, and some of them even reference works that are in the National Portrait Gallery. So for example, this image of Virginia Woolf is based on a painting by her sister Vanessa Bell, who of course is famous for her contribution to the Bloomsbury Group. And Virginia Woolf, we know her works such as Mrs. Dalloway or Orlando. What people might also not know about Virginia Woolf is her contribution to art criticism. She wrote a text called Pictures and Portraits, where she wrote about Walter Sickert. She wrote about her experiences being in the National Portrait Gallery, which is why I love this museum so much. This is Iris Murdoch, painted between 1984 and 1986 by Tom Phillips. Iris Murdoch is a philosopher and the writer of 26 novels. In 1978, she won the Booker Prize for her fantastic work, The Sea. And during the time that this painting would have been made, she was also shortlisted for the Booker in 1985 for her work, The Good Apprentice. This work is one of the most fascinating portraits in the entire museum because what we see here is a real eeriness. In a way, her skin doesn't almost look like skin. She's almost set in this other world and she's focusing on something in particular, which really speaks to her philosophy as well. We know that Tom Phillips, the artist, was very inspired by Iris Murdoch's work, and actually this whole painting signifies a dialogue between the artist and the sitter. In the background, we see a recreation of Titian's The Flaying of Marsyas, a story from Ovid's Metamorphosis, which sees Marsyas being flayed like a half-man, half-goat in the background. We know that they both would have seen this work at the Royal Academy, so I love this idea that the relationship goes beyond the portrait that we're looking at. And then, so interestingly, we see the ginkgo plant here. Now, Iris and Tom had this conversation about the ginkgo plant and the fact that they just wanted to include it because it was a plant that they both liked. But actually, interestingly, Iris Murdoch suffered from Alzheimer's in her later life. And the ginkgo plant is used as a remedy for Alzheimer's and is now the emblem of the Alzheimer's Foundation. So it's a really interesting conversation about what lives on in this work. In this part of the gallery, we find ourselves among the romantics, writers, poets, artists, but especially people like Mary Shelley, the daughter of Mary Wollstonecraft, the fantastic feminist who we see in Work in Progress downstairs. Sadly, Mary Wollstonecraft died in childbirth after having Mary Shelley, but Mary Shelley went on to achieve greatness. Age 18, she wrote her phenomenal text, Frankenstein, which is actually inspired by a trip that she took to Lake Geneva with her husband, Percy Shelley, to Lord Byron's house, who was actually next to her here in the National Portrait Gallery. Sadly, 6 years after she met Percy, he died by drowning when she was just 21. And so this portrait, being made in 1831, 10 years after his death, might suggest a forlorn look. She's wearing black, she's in mourning. But also what I find so fascinating about this portrait amongst all the men is how different she looks to all the other male writers, in the sense that with Percy's work, we see him immortalized with the quill. In Byron's, he looks extremely grand, whereas hers, she's more kind of set back, more demure. It's an interesting discussion to be had about how we should immortalize different writers, because here we don't necessarily see her as a writer as much as we do a woman. I absolutely love this portrait of Janette Winterson from 2019 by the artist Suzanne du Toit. In the same year, Janette was longlisted for the Booker Prize for her work Frankenstein. And what I love about this work is how different it is to so many of the regal and smart portraits we see in this gallery. She emanates this radiance set against nature with her cat and dog, but also with her spade in the garden. And it's as though she's worlds away from the writer that we know and love her as. And if we look really closely at the work, we have the L here, the O here, the V and the E. And I love that as a kind of hidden message and what Janette Winterson wants to also say about herself as well as her fantastic works. Here is a portrait of Emily Bronte by Patrick Branwell Bronte, her brother. And next to it is a portrait of Emily and her sisters, Anne and Charlotte, with a rather haunted figure in the background who was originally Patrick, their brother and painter, but he's painted himself out. Now you might be wondering why these paintings are so creased, why we find just a fragment of Emily in this work here. It's because these paintings were found years later in 1914 in a farmhouse in Ireland. But I think it's actually really exciting that the National Portrait Gallery have chose to keep them in this way because it gives them a whole new story. Interestingly, when we think about Emily Bronte's writing, especially Wuthering Heights, this was a work that caused an absolute sensation and dividedness among critics. It is worlds away from this kind of rather demure, forlorn, shy woman that we meet in this painting. Emily Bronte died when she was just 30 years old, so really we don't know what she would have completed had she been able to live longer. This work is also cut out from a much larger painting that was actually selected by Charlotte's widower. He said that this is the only fragment that should remain. But also when we think about how hard it was to be a woman in a man's world at this time, they wrote under their masculine pseudonyms Acton, Ellis and Currer Bell, which is also fascinating when we think of the lengths that women had to go just to be recognised and celebrated as writers. This is Toyin Oji-Odutola's portrait of Zade Smith, one of our greatest living writers here in the UK. And she's titled the work Sadie, which is actually Zade Smith's birth name. Toyin Oji-Odutola, a Nigerian-born, New York-based artist, she set Zade Smith in this sort of surrealist realm. She's wearing this extraordinary, dazzling red cape and these gold shoes. And what is behind her is a map of northwest London. Obviously, lots of Zade Smith's novels have been set here. Zade Smith being someone who's been longlisted for the Man Booker twice and shortlisted once. And then on the left-hand side, we see this blue palm, which could also evoke her mother's Jamaican heritage. And really what we see in this world is a communion of reality, but also fiction. And I love the fact that Zade Smith also says that even to look at anything requires imagination. And I think that's what we have to keep in mind when we go around the National Portrait Gallery. To find out more, come down and see these works yourself here at the National Portrait Gallery in London, where it is free to see all of these works. And also, if you want to find out more about the Booker Prize, head to thebookerprizes.com for more.